we help build the capacity of government? Because that does seem, you know, one of the biggest constraints to going to scale.
So here I think philanthropy may have a special and privileged role. We're not government. We don't have to worry about the next election cycle. We're not business. We don't have to worry about the next quarterly earnings. We're not an NGO. We don't have to worry about where our next funding stream will come from. So it's our obligation and our opportunity to really talk truth to power. And I think many of the philanthropies, and we especially, and we have for many years, actually fund government as well. Because we want to teach government to be innovative. We want to teach them how to trust and be less bureaucratic and deliver the kinds of programs that have the same metrics and bottom line that we see in the corporate sector. So whether it's helping them innovate and transform their processes, the Young Foundation, for example, in the UK, is putting us a innovator in every UK cabinet ministry to help. So that's one way that philanthropy can do it. Another is really the kind of financing that we're doing to help all of the countries that we fund around universal health coverage to totally reorganize their healthcare financing so that they don't spend more money for health, but they get more health for the money. So again, using the government really as a grantee to incent, and then consulting with them to create the right policies and practices. So we've been consulting for many governors now around the United States who are developing infrastructure banks, not willing to wait for the stasis in Washington to unlock itself. The governors are asking, how do we attract private sector capital into, and great engineering firms and great consulting firms into what we need at the state level? And so we work, for example, with a group of governors that call themselves the West Coast Infrastructure Exchange, the governors of California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia, and help them to understand what elements in their policies were preventing private sector investments and good public-private partnerships. And they were willing to take that diagnostic from us, I think, in a very open and free way, a way that they might not have from others. And they are actually changing their capital budgeting process, a number of things. And that will allow private sector capital then to come in these kinds of partnerships that are critical.
Yeah, fabulous. And Vince, do you want to jump in there on this?
Sure.
Yeah, because I think
I would want to indicate that I think that corporations have an enormous role in partnering with governments. We have 5 partnerships with PEPFAR, the U.S. government's program for AIDS relief. And it's a matter of bringing complementary skills. And in this case, of course, you know, we bring the clinical knowledge, the technical knowledge, the training that we can bring to places in Africa and Asia, the Caribbean, but they bring the knowledge of how to work in country, and also a validation for us in terms of our program. And working together, we can do things that we could have never accomplished before. And you know, you can look at that model in the developing world. You take some place like China, it's a very different type of partnership. We're partnered with the Ministry of Health in reducing infections in Chinese hospitals. It's a very different way of doing business. We go in and we talk about shared value and how do we solve problems in healthcare where we can help you and work with you and create shared value. And it's a totally different way of doing business. And doing that, it opens doors for us and it opens doors for them. So I think there's a tremendous role for industry to do this. And in addition, we're now starting to see that they're replicating those partnerships with other corporations taking the same model. So I think a lot of us here could do quite a bit.
Yeah, great, great. And aren't you also partnering with the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Singapore or the Singaporean government?
Yes, well, that's a whole other piece of this.
Thing. So I think we should get the sovereign wealth funds more engaged in this field.
So they have been a tremendous partner for us, and they're partnering with us on technology development for issues that would be very risky to take. So they're willing, just as some of the NGOs are now, this is a major change that's going on both in the developed and developing world, where they're willing to take the technical risk, invest in the training and infrastructure as well.
Yeah, great, great. Neil, I'd like to come back to you on sort of 2 points. First of all, this challenge that you put out there to the companies on the first mile, and I agree with you. Let's start from the customer, the person who needs it. So the first mile. What would an NGO like you or some of your NGO counterparts be wanting from business, if that's not too simplistic a question? I mean, how can we get more energy around this first mile, last mile challenge?
Well, I think business recognizes it. So I mean, are great partners in this. It's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really tough because when you sort of look at markets, and if you segment people from, let's say, from $8 to $12 a day, people who, and this is important to help all people. It's not just wanting to skew everything down. That's how strong societies are emerged. So I wouldn't, I don't want to denigrate shared value, building strong societies anywhere, because it's critical. It's a better way. But $8 to $12, the market kind of works, right? But between 5 and 8, it's tougher. But the business models you can build there, can scale more, and you can price whatever the service or the product in a more affordable way. Below 5, it gets really hard, and particularly if you get below 2. And the examples, the reason I say this, because there are a lot of smart organizations. I think TechnoService here is one of the leaders in this, but who, we've all had a hard time building models for people, let's say, that live on $5 a day or less. Or let's, take dry land farmers, right, who live in arid lands. That, business, there's not a lot of business that gets out there. Right? Or so in Ethiopia, there are parts that are easy to reach and shared value can scale. In some of the more vulnerable areas, it's really hard. To me, the answer, I would love, and this is where I think the combination of philanthropy is, kind of bringing down that risk and supporting a group like ourselves and others, and a few, businesses that are really willing to stick there and test those models, right? And take the long view. I think we can bring more progress than we have. But it is a tough challenge. And the final thing I would say on it is I think we then need to be pretty rigorous about our learning on that. Exactly. So it's not just anecdotal. There's a lot of stories we all tell. But if we're going to then extend that out, but I remain optimistic.
Yeah, I want to give an example of something we're working on that I think may be an evolution in a way to solve that problem. And it'll just take 1 minute to lay out what the idea is. You know that the development aid rural electrification programs have largely failed all over the developing world, particularly in the poorest areas, because they don't need 100% of the electricity that's produced. They can't afford it. So once the support goes away from the World Bank or whatever, the electrification program always fails. So we watched, let's take India. We watched the penetration of the cell phone towers through the most rural parts of India. And in India, cell phone tower companies are there. It's not necessarily the Vodafones or whatever, but the companies themselves. And so we took a kind of American-centric idea and we said, well, if we were building a shopping mall, we would be looking for an anchor tenant. So maybe the cell phone tower can be the anchor tenant. In India, they were working on diesel, so it's a horrible environmental impact. And we would negotiate with them and see how much of the usage of the electricity they would be able to guarantee. And it varied somewhere, we now have 100 pilots. It varies somewhere between 50 and 75%. We then worked with the cell phone companies and a little bit of philanthropic capital to start alternative energy companies in the villages themselves as a way of getting the villagers to have businesses and not flood into the cities at the rate of 1 every 70 seconds, which is the India data point. And then the people in the village or the small businesses take up the rest of the electricity. So you create a perfect virtuous cycle in which you're lifting the very bottom. They're getting the usage, whether it's just 2 minutes to plug in their cell phone or refrigeration or water filtration. Those small businesses then have the electricity in a reliable way that allows them to really start and grow small businesses. The cell phone towers are fueled by renewable, positive energy rather than diesel. Everybody's happy. So this is a total shared value kind of proposition that lifts, that builds, and so the guarantees are from the business rather than from the philanthropy. We just seeded the ecosystem.
Yeah, great. I think, as I say, great example, that idea of anchor platforms so whether it's cell phone towers or your milk collection points where you're also providing health advice and nutrition advice, or factories where you're doing maternal health care advice and teaching young women about entrepreneurship. I think we need to think much more creatively about those anchor sort of platform models.